Welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together for you here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and you can find out more about us online at, say it along with me, kids, if you're regular listeners, tertiumquids.org. You regular listeners, you help the others spell tertium quids, and it's spelled in the traditional way, whatever that means. Joining us now, hold on, let me, hang on one second. Yep, the internet is still on, and our next guest is from the Heartland Institute, and he is the host of a daily podcast on the internet and net neutrality. And welcome into the program, Jesse Hathaway. And just for those who are wondering, Jesse is connected to us via the internet, so if any of the mean, evil throttlers happen, he will be the one that gets throttled first. Good morning, Jesse. How are you?
I am doing great, coming to you live over the power of the internet.
Very few times does a generation get to see such a thing come about that, in our business model here, freedom and prosperity, the internet has been such a volatile tool for, and first and foremost, conceptually speaking, is this why the governments around the world, not just the United States, try to find ways to do their own throttling of the internet?
Well, it's really funny you bring up throttling, because what the government had been doing to the internet has been definitely throttling it in the sense of beating it to an inch of its life. But the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, recently made a move to kind of lighten up the regulatory chokehold on the internet here in the U.S. and certainly the rest of the world by extension, because what happens to the internet in the U.S. happens to the internet for everybody, because it was born and invented here and spread elsewhere. So that's basically what happens is the governments always seek to expand their power. That's the nature of the beast. But every so often, once in a lifetime type things happen, and the government chooses or decides to voluntarily give that power up and return that power to the free market. And that's what happened in the past few weeks. With this recent vote by the FCC. Now,
Jesse, let's first and foremost let's remind people that it's the Open Internet Order, and understand I've been doing radio long enough to remember when I had to work under what was laughably called the Fairness Doctrine, and these orders they're written by children's book authors and are exactly the opposite of what they come down to. But this Open Internet Order is not something that dates back to the mid-'90s. This was something that was instituted only a couple of years ago.
It really is. So, jumping in the Wayback Machine, so to speak, back in 2015, the FCC was under the control of a guy named Tom Wheeler, who was President Obama's pick for the chairman of the FCC. Decided that the internet needed the FCC's help to survive, and that we needed to ban what's called paid prioritization. This is paid prioritization was kind of a contractual agreement between, let's say, content provider, let's say Netflix, and a network owner, let's say Verizon, just to pick one. So this agreement would allow data to travel on less congested networks. So when the main route is clogged up, let's say it's peak, everyone's getting on the logging on the internet, or there's lots of congestion going on in the primary routes, and Netflix may wish to pay a little bit extra to Verizon to send so that their data gets routed over the less congested routes and gets to the consumers, gets to their customers, perhaps a little bit quicker than had they taken the main route. So the way I kind of use an analogy for this is it's like the difference between the main highway and the toll road. Main highway is clogged up, everyone uses it, but you might want to take the toll road. It might be a little bit quicker, or it might be a little bit more well maintained.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to things like Netflix or other things like streaming, games, watching video, listening to music. That kind of data has a higher need to get to people's computers in the right order and at the right time. Other kinds of data, let's say email, web page, that sort of thing, it matters a little bit less whether or not everything gets there at the same time and in the same order. So when, let's say we're watching YouTube and we're all familiar with the buffering page.
Yep.
The buffering is when your computer has to sit there and rearrange the bits that are out of order, spend time and effort rearranging it and putting it in the right order so you can watch it. So basically, YouTube or Netflix might want to cut down on the amount of time that their customers would have to spend buffering and increase the amount of time they can spend watching. Mm-hmm. That's where this paid prioritization comes in. They can pay a little bit more money and get a little bit better quality. The FCC said, no, that's no good for consumers. We need to ban that. And the FCC, fast forwarding to today, has said, no, that's actually, we overstepped our bounds several years ago. We're undoing this power grab. We're now allowing paid prioritization agreements to take place if the content providers and the network owners so decide to enter into those agreements.
So from what I gather, and I was fascinated at reading the expose that unearthed the fact that in all of this whoop-de-doo, Netflix has been going around paying advocates to go out there and say that Netflix would be throttled, and here's the instance when we were throttled, when actually they were the ones that throttled themselves back, and then told everyone that it was their service providers that were slowing them down, and to call their member of Congress and insist that everyone be given a free and open internet, when really it just seems like, for all pedestrian purposes, they just wanted to save a little cash on their end.
Well, it would certainly look that way, and hopefully they're not listening, and hopefully they're not going to cut my Netflix subscription for saying that.
I've grown so tired. You want to know what?
It appears that way.
I liked Netflix when I could actually get movies I wanted to see on it. Now I'm, all right, great. It's Orange is the New Black season 85 or whatever it is. But when I want to see Star Wars, I can't get it from Netflix. So I don't know. And really, the internet, though, provides the opportunity where Netflix has to fight with Amazon, who has to fight with Hulu, and that benefits all of us, doesn't it, Jesse?
It really does. When these, people talk about, oh no, the big companies are having too much power. Well, what is the power they're really having? The power they wouldn't have any money if people didn't give them the money to provide them the services that that I want, and you want, and every one of their customers want. So when they're competing against each other, they're really competing for our business. And we, the consumers, are the ones who benefit when Hulu and Amazon and Netflix go to war against each other, because they're competing on who can be the best provider of in this case, streaming video.
And that's what we should be hoping for, and that's what I think they were trying to dodge with a little government intervention. Jesse Hathaway, research fellow in charge of budget and tax policy at the Heartland Institute, and does a weekly or daily blog, Jesse, on the FCC and net neutrality and the internet in general. And I've tweaked a lot of my friends each day since this order was rescinded, and said, "Yep, internet's still there." Now, for when I'm on location, use an internet-based service, and I pay a little bit more. You can get access to that service for free for a limited amount of time and a limited amount of space. But because I'm using it for commerce, I don't want it to be catch as catch can, so I pay more for it, and that's the way it should be. I mean, we can find tree branches, or we can buy a cord of wood, depending on what predictability we want. Isn't that one of those things that the government shouldn't be involved with? Correct, Jesse?
Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because not only was this open internet order the FCC overstepping its grounds, it was actually stepping in on another government agency's power. So it wasn't just giving itself power over the internet. It was basically going over to another government agency and saying, I'm going to take your milkshake. I'm going to take your job over. Because for the entire history of the internet, there's only been a handful of actual documented net neutrality violations. Because what net neutrality actually is, and what net neutrality was sold to people back in 2015 are completely different. Net neutrality, as defined by experts, is the idea that you should be allowed to plug it. It doesn't matter what brand your router is or what brand your computer is. You're still able to access any legal content without discrimination. That's what net neutrality is. What the open internet order actually did was about this paid prioritization. So, as you said, it was totally missold. It was sold to people on a false bill of goods.
It was similar. It sounds similar to when we went through the debate over beta versus VHS, and eventually the industry figured out, well, most people kind of like the VHS, even if beta is better quality. The cost versus quality curve seems to be on the side of VHS, and there are some commercial applications of beta videotape, I guess, still to this day. But it sounds like the same thing, just to make sure that every router and every browser could get to HTTP:// and then go from there, right?
Right. So there's only been a handful over the entire history of the internet. There's only been a handful, maybe 5 or 6 incidences when that's actually been violated. And every single time, the Federal Trade Commission was the government agency that had the jurisdiction to deal with those, and they dealt with those just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
sure.
As I said, it's the nature of a government agency to seek to expand its power. And in this case, FCC, back in 2015, stepped in and took that power from FTC, said, you guys have a power we want. We're taking it from you. And now, all the way in 2017, we're not really repealing anything. We're just going back to the way the internet was a mere 2 years ago. And I think the internet worked just fine without the need for the FCC to regulate the internet. We can definitely, because this is what's called anti-competitive behavior. Mm-hmm. If a net neutrality violation actually happens, that's anti-competitive behavior. Well, that's an FTC. That's a Federal Trade Commission. That's a job for them, not the job for the FCC. And so this order that the FCC passed recently, the Restoring Internet Freedom Order, is an admission, hey, we messed up. FTC, here's your power back. We're going to stay on our side of internet regulating communications. You guys stay on your side of regulating anti-competitive behavior. And it'll work out because it worked. We know it worked out for literally decades without the FCC having control of the internet, or having in terms of anti-competitive behavior.
Well, go
ahead.
Well, let me ask you this. Because the internet is used in so many cases for communication, I've often asked that through mission creep, the FCC, in making sure that some big, well-heeled company in Cleveland couldn't blast over my signals and keep my broadcast off the air over the free and open airwaves. I get that. You have a list of who's broadcasting to where and how far and that kind of thing. But mission creep, little by little, all of a sudden it's what is your content? Who do you have on? You have to have opposing viewpoints on. And then through that, people learn that if you have to have opposing viewpoints on, I can shutter my opponent's views by just declining the broadcaster's invitation. So you see how mission creep can do this in. What about the argument, just as the devil's advocate in this, Jesse, that I've heard that so much of the internet is about communication and so little is technically about trade. It should be the other way around. The FCC should control the internet like it controls radio and television broadcasting, and the FTC should be held out of it just in the case of company v. company.
Well, that was basically the argument that the FCC made for itself back in 2015. The problem with that argument is that they've had to go all the way back to laws passed in 1937 to justify that power grab. They had to go back to the Telecommunications Act of 1937 and point to their legal justification for regulating the phone system for why the FCC should have jurisdiction over internet, the way that internet companies do their business between them and content providers. So, in other words, they were using they were using a law that was passed specifically to govern telephone company operation, utility companies, to give themselves a reason to define them, basically redefine their mission as including control of the internet, these internet peering agreements. So the internet wasn't even invented, obviously, in 1937. See, it's very hard to argue that when Congress passed the Telecom Act of 1937, that's probably not what they meant when they gave the FCC that justification. They probably did not mean it to include the internet. We have existing laws. We have existing regulations that work perfectly fine, and there was no need for FCC to go and do that. And this restoring internet order, an internet freedom order, is an acknowledgement of that. Hey, basically saying, hey, we messed up.
Yeah.
The free market, there was not a free market failure here. There was not a need for us to go and do that. We're going to set things right between not only just us and not between the relationship between the government and the consumer, but between these two government agencies that, I'm sure the Federal Trade Commission is perfectly competent. I have every confidence that they are competent, and they are able to step in and prevent and punish companies that if it does happen, that I'm sure the FTC can deal with it. They don't need the FCC's help. They don't need the FCC to do their job for them.
We know what collusion looks like, and all right, maybe we don't anymore. But anyway, if that being said, Jesse, I appreciate everything you do, and I forgot to mention Budget and Tax News, your monthly newsletter through the Heartland Institute, heartland.org. You've got an interesting piece, and we're off to the Consumer Electronics Show, so maybe we should reconvene again. I was reading a little bit before we came on the guidebook to the future of man and machine, because certainly the government would want to regulate that as well. But I appreciate everything you do, and I appreciate the fact that we made it through a half-an-hour interview and nobody throttled either one of us, as far as I can tell. You weren't throttled at all in there, were you?
I am thankfully unthrottled by the government.
And I would know if I had been. So thank you so much, Jesse, and keep up the great work, heartland.org, and look for his newsletter, Budget and Tax News. You have a wonderful new year, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
All right, sounds good. Looking forward to it.
We'll be right back with more Freedom and Prosperity Radio.